I read this fascinating book earlier this year that's like one half business school case study and one half film history. But Erich Schwartzel, who writes for the Wall Street Journal, wrote this book, Red Carpet. And it was as riveting and intoxicating and depressing as any movie that I've ever seen. And I guess the whole China story got on my radar over the last couple of years when I started seeing articles in Variety and Hollywood Reporter and like the Deadline, all the trades about the souring of the relationship. Because in an ideal world, once upon a time, it was a relationship of mutual exploitation. Hollywood wanted this rapidly growing audience, and it's now officially the largest audience in the world for watching movies. And China wanted to learn a little bit about Hollywood filmmaking for their own homegrown film industry. So marriage made in heaven or hell, depending upon your point of view. But this story really goes back to 1994 when China first opened their doors to Hollywood and said, all right, 10 movies a year, you only get a piece of the box office, but let's do some business. So opened with The Fugitive, made a few million. It was always a market that was regarded as having a lot of growth, a lot of potential, but it didn't really crystallize until Avatar, when new 3D theaters started being constructed all over the country. And by 2011, it's really in full swing where Transformers movies are grossing more in China than they are in America. They're even doing Chinese product placement, Chinese actors, Chinese locations, even working with the Chinese government for like script approval and or modifications. And now suddenly there appears to be a divorce that's happening where the 10 movies that are supposed to come out every year, maybe it's only 3 or 4, and Hollywood's like, oh shit, like what the fuck's going on? Like, we've been green lighting movies recently on the assumption that we're gonna possibly gross a couple $100 million. Like, you don't get to green light a movie like, take your pick, some giant monstrosity. Say West Side Story, which lost a ton of money, unless there's the hope that you might be able to recoup a lot of that over in China. And what I found most fascinating about this book, it's a giant topic and it's so multifaceted, but each chapter he'd focus on one filmmaker or one production and show kind of the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations along the way to kind of help you have a window into this ever-evolving story. And I just want to I want to invite people into the subject by just calling attention to a few of those stories just so people have an idea of what the hell is going on, because the first worrying signs that
a lot of people don't know. This is going to be news to a lot of people where it's background chatter.
News to me.
We have to explicate this stuff in particular so that people understand this is a foreground thing happening.
For me, it was background noise for the last couple of years, but the late 90s when we see our first signs that Hollywood and China are a strange kind of couple, because you have Kundun, you have 7 Years in Tibet, and you have Red Corner, all of which send shockwaves throughout Hollywood, because in China, they have this concept, or it's from an idiom from an old fairy tale: kill the chicken to scare the monkey, because this guy with the performing monkey, the monkey won't perform, so he kills the chicken in front of the monkey starts dancing again. And these 3 movies, you have the first examples of kill the chicken to scare the monkey, because Kundun's made by Disney, very pro Dalai Lama, late 90s, Dalai Lama is very big in Hollywood, people love the Dalai Lama. Richard Gere, 1993, makes a speech at the Oscars about Tibet and China, everybody stands up, thunderous ovation, everybody's on board. So a lot of these movies started getting made. But Disney wanted to make theme parks, and they wanted to create cable channels. They wanted to sell toys in China. China did not like Kundun, and this is still when the market's very small. And Michael Eisner has to fly to China and essentially grovel.
Kowtow and grovel, beg and scrape, bow and scrape.
He says, we did not mean to offend our friends. Disney is a silly company. We make silly entertainment, family friendly, etc. This will never happen again, and we're going to basically bury the movie. It'll never get seen.
An apology for the ancients. Right
7 Years in Tibet, made by Sony. Well, Sony doesn't just make movies. They also sell electronics. China made it abundantly clear.
Sony's a Japanese company,
too. And they're Japanese. China made it abundantly clear, hey, you know all those like Walkmans and like DVD players and TVs that you sell in China? We might just close our doors to you for a year because we do not like 7 Years in Tibet. And then Red Corner with Richard Gere, which he's very proud of, he is no longer able to be cast in any movie that is hoping to open in China because they do not like Red Corner, they do not like him. So if you're making Ant-Man and you're casting Henry Pym, maybe you might consider Richard Gere. He's the perfect age. But let's go with Michael Douglas because that's the easier path. That's the path of least resistance. And the story, and once again, this is late 90s when the box office is nothing. Flash forward now to early teens in the 21st century, and you have Transformers: Age of Extinction making hundreds of millions over there. China's able to thump their chest and kind of flex their muscles. Like Dark Knight in 2008, China asked for changes with the Chinese gangster from Hong Kong. Yeah. Warner Brothers refused. No Chinese release. But once again, the market wasn't there yet. This is pre-Avatar. A few years later, it might have been a very different conversation that they had with Christopher Nolan. And I think the most chilling story out of all of this happened recently with Chloe Zhao. And between The Rider and Nomadland, she was on the ascent, kicking butt. She was born in Beijing. Chinese officials love the fact that she's about to win an Oscar for Best Director. Like, the stars were in total alignment. Disney taps her to make Eternals, giant Marvel movie. It looks like this is going to be a win-win, home run. Everybody's going to be happy. But then a little-known interview with a Filmmaker magazine from 2013 surfaces where Chloe had the audacity to describe China as a country of lies. Not only does Eternals not get a release in China, but they scrub her from the internet. You cannot find a mention of Nomadland or The Rider anywhere on the Chinese internet. And so these are decisions now that are driving what gets made, how they get made, and by whom. And if you're feeling a slight chill running through you, I'm feeling it as well, because it's a very ominous situation where another country's values, another country's censorship, another country's bureaucracy is dictating anticipatory censorship on the part of filmmakers and writers in Hollywood. Like, well, I'm writing this giant movie, this huge sci-fi superhero extravaganza, but I can't include explicit sex because they don't like that in China. I can't include themes of an outsider prevailing because they don't like that in China. I can't include homosexuality, like
sorry, Freddie Mercury, not happening.
Bohemian Rhapsody, yeah. Wildly recut for the Chinese market. And I can't even include themes of dissent, because once again, they might not like that in China. And the rules are always shifting. It's not like they have an official rating system and a list of rules. Abide by these rules, you get your release, we're good to go. It's a black box. It's diplomacy. It's mysterious. It's confusing. And the rules that apply to Hollywood movies don't necessarily apply to the Chinese movies. Wolf Warrior 2. But what do you think of this situation so far?
2 words: soft power. Those are the words that Schwartzel used in the book. I mean, that's an ancient term that goes back to diplomacy, in the old days. But like the Chinese are able to wield a type of cudgel, I keep using this term, outside their own borders, and they know exactly what they have going for them. I think people's eyes tend to roll back of their heads and they glaze over and they just tune out when they hear about international diplomacy. People don't really pay attention to what happens in foreign governments anymore. They're aware of the Communist Party running China. They're generally aware maybe of the Three Gorges Dam project. Maybe they're aware of the huge modernization where all the villages were emptied out and put into these prefab cities over the course of 15 years. Really shoddy construction. The fact that they established Hong Kong again, when it was handed back in 1999, the culture in Hong Kong changed drastically. China is not a monolith. I mean, the government is. That's the thing about the Chinese Communist Party out of Beijing. It runs as a monolith, but the country is a fascinating place. It is 15 countries in one. It's a confederation.
1.3 billion people.
1.3 billion people, yeah. But all the different regional variations from the south to the west to the north. I mean, it encompasses every single topography you can imagine, and the people are extremely different. And there has been no mass project on Earth the size of which the Belt and Road Initiative that they're doing, also the fact that they prefab these cities out of thin air. It's all amazing. So they've created...
And filled with multiplexes. Like I said, more screens than anywhere else in the world.
Well, they invented a middle class, albeit a very unusual looking middle class to us. But the other thing that they've done is they've ran through levels of cultural literacy very fast, because I think up until recently, the market they were playing in China was probably equivalent to like 1940s, 1950s American suburban market. That was the idea of decoding messages.
Hollywood also had the complacency of assuming we will always be able to make blockbuster entertainment better than they can.
Yeah.
Hollywood has been so dominant for so long, they were operating under the assumption that they could always create a form of blockbuster entertainment that would be the best in the world. But what was happening all this time was that people like Rennie Harlin, who were unhireable in America, were getting gigs over in China. And not only were they getting gigs over there making these giant blockbusters, but suddenly Rennie Harlin's back on top. Cutthroat Island never happened. He had a largely Chinese crew, and they are studying what he's doing, because at the time there was a period where a lot of Chinese audiences members thought that their official state propaganda tasted a little bit like medicine. But what they really wanted was to make a movie like The Patriot. Because The Patriot, while I might think it's a ridiculous movie, it was wildly popular and has a certain kind of ultra-nationalistic flavor that China wanted to create. And now all of a sudden in like 2017, it becomes abundantly clear that while Hollywood thought they were the exploiter, they were the ones being exploited when a movie like Wolf Warrior 2 emerges that is insanely popular. I've watched it. It's a ton of fun. It's ultra violent. It's totally insane, but it's as jingoistic and nationalistic as something like First Blood 2, Rambo. And I imagine being a teenager in China now, you probably feel something very similar watching Wolf Warrior 2 to how I felt watching First Blood 2 back in the mid-'80s. And when those movies are outperforming Marvel movies, or Marvel movies aren't even getting released at all, well, now the tables have turned because Hollywood still desperately needs China. They need that box office. They greenlit these movies like Black Widow and Shang-Chi and Eternals, operating under the assumption that China will always say yes. Now they're saying no. These movies are making it more difficult to be profitable, and China's film industry is thriving. It's fully operational. They are cranking them out. Are they exporting them to the degree that they would like? No, but they are. It wouldn't surprise me at all if in 20 years, instead of Hollywood consultants like Rennie Harlan going to China, you see the reverse, where Hollywood's like, we kind of don't know what we're doing anymore. Can y'all come over here and tell us how to run our business for us, please?
Yeah, well, again, the soft power comes because Wolf Warrior was as much made for its African constituents as it was to play inside China. Which is, it spins your head to realize that, the Chinese have been investing so much money in Africa to essentially pull out rare earth metals and various resources. And, they've been doing all sorts of things, building bridges, building roads, schools, hydration, water plants, sewage treatment. The idea has been to exploit the continent of Africa. One of the psyops thing that they do, and China made this jingoistic movie that really is about the Chinese guy saves the Africans from the white
from the Americans.
From the Americans.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a Marvel star in the form of, remind me of his name?
Grillo.
Frank Grillo.
A man whose name you cannot remember.
I'll never remember.
Under pain of death.
Crossbones from Civil War. But he's playing the villain, and to be fair, you can tell he's having a blast because kick-ass martial arts sequences.
Paid millions of dollars.
And it's R-rated, hardcore graphic violence in an action movie that we used to see on the regular in America, but now we make these, once again, we make PG-13 frozen pizza. You won't see a blockbuster with like squibs exploding as people are just getting laid low. And so, like I said, I didn't necessarily buy into the propaganda of the film, but as an action lover, I sat back and I was like, I have to give credit where credit is due. Wolf Warrior 2 is beating Hollywood at its own game because they don't even make these kinds of movies anymore.
Yeah, but it's so strange to think that the state, the Chinese state out of Beijing is such a prudish, moral, nanny state, a paternal place.
Yeah, no horror movies, no ghosts, no sex.
Yeah, no ghosts.
It's a very paternalistic attitude toward their own population in a lot of ways.
In all the Disneys in China, there's no haunted mansions because you cannot do ghosts.
That's why Ghostbusters didn't get a release there.
Yeah, it's crazy.
All the recent reboots.
Yeah, it's wild. Anyway, but the thing is, it's like blood is no problem. Disappearing people on the street, no problem. The Uyghur camps in Western China, no problem. The demeaning of the human body, no problem. I mean, this is a separate side issue, but there's this idea. I've read this about this. They said apparently one of the hoary things that's been left over in China for thousands of years is that a body belongs to the state. We think of ourselves
as does the film industry. It's an arm of the state.
Yeah, right. And it's like, but we have this, Western myth about, we're each man standing in a cornfield, hoeing the land, building our own ship, going to vistas and doing our own thing. Every man is, it's manifest destiny. You have what you want. Your liberty's your own thing. And in China, it's like, no, you belong to the state. You're part of a body. And so whatever the state wants with your body, that's what allows them to move millions of people from villages, flatten the villages, flood them with water to build a dam, move them to cities. And people complain, but it doesn't get them anywhere because you have a central state. And here's the bigger problem with all this is that China is an autocracy. People may know what that word means, but look at Beijing. What's coming out of the Politburo, the parliament, whatever it is in Beijing. That's an autocracy. That's a top-down paternal view. You have all the princelings, all these the descendants of Mao who are still running the Communist Party, especially after all these purges, these anti-corruption purges, where they were actually executing people for taking bribes over the last 5 years, cleaning house. And that was Xi Jinping consolidating power. You can't fight an autocracy. An autocracy always wins. We are too fractious. I mean, if you want to talk about Hollywood...
What you reminded me of is one of the funniest stories of when they were trying to do a Chinese remake of Serpico. People don't know Serpico is about Al Pacino in the 70s fighting police corruption in New York. But it's hard to do a movie about police corruption in China without acknowledging that
there is
police corruption exists. And of course, there's no police corruption in China. So the movie didn't get made. Does the American movie exist if you're acquiescing more often than not? Because once again, going back to Marvel, Doctor Strange, the first one, the character of the Ancient One, which in the comics, which is a Tibetan wizard. Well, Tibet, that's a touchy subject. But if you change his race and you change his gender, some people might say that, oh, you're whitewashing him. But Hollywood had to basically do the calculation. Do we offend Americans by whitewashing an Asian character, or do we offend the Chinese by having a Tibetan character? And they decided it's easier and better to offend the Americans by whitewashing with a Celtic warrior played by Tilda Swinton, as opposed to doing a Tibetan monk, which would offend China. As part of media literacy, it's important to know how your media gets made, by whom, and what's driving their decisions. And like I said, when it comes to film history, or if you just like the film business, Red Carpet is just a riveting story that from start to finish that will floor anybody who has even a casual interest